Hey, Matt Stone here, talking about David Roche. This guy broke a 19-year-old record at the Leadville 100 this year, and there's some really interesting physiology lessons to be learned from it that I think people who aren't interested in punishing their bodies in a 14 or 15-hour long run could still learn from it. And it really flies in the face of the kind of trend away from carbohydrates that we see, in pop nutrition. So, anyway, I wanted to talk about that today. So, I'm really interested in the Leadville 100 because I've lived right over the hill from Leadville, and I was always really fascinated by this 100-mile long grueling race with tons of elevation gain that was run at very, very high elevation. And it's one of the most prestigious, ultra marathons in the entire world. And yeah, there's just a tremendous amount of mystique that surrounded it, that surrounds it. And the record was held for 19 years, dating all the way back to 2005, by a guy who's kind of, I would consider to be, I don't know, kind of the Michael Jordan of mountain running for the state of Colorado, right? Matt Carpenter still holds the record for the Pikes Peak Marathon, right? It's 13.1 miles up, a 6,800-foot vertical climb, and then you run all the way back down the mountain. And he still holds the record. That's a 20-year-old record as well. And he held the record for the Leadville 100. Tremendous VO2 max on this guy. It's one of the highest ever tested, well into the 90s, and just a superb athlete, and without a doubt the greatest, real mountain climber, mountain runner, uphill runner, maybe ever, anywhere. And so beating his record was really huge. But what makes David Roche so interesting, and what makes his feat of breaking this record so interesting, is that he'd never run a 100-mile race before. In fact, I think he'd only run 150 miler. And his training and his nutrition were pretty wild and very counterintuitive, right? So I've always heard about this Leadville 100, and I always thought in my mind that, okay, these guys who are winning the race are out there putting in times of 15 or 16 hours, something like that. And I pictured, okay, if I could hike for 15 or 16 hours and I could get my feet in shape and, nice and tough and leathery and able to go out there and endure that. And then I worked on my speed, maybe start running the downhills and the flats, walking the uphill. Yeah, I could kind of see how maybe, just maybe, with enough training and enough time on my feet, yeah, maybe I could accomplish something like that. And so I think intuitively, and the sport is kind of like that. For a long time, people have been focused on, just the endurance aspect. How do you keep going for that long? And people are, leaning a little bit more towards keto, trying to become fat adapted. When I was super high fat, I was on a high fat diet, thinking that this fat was like the almighty ultimate human fuel. There was a marathon, ultra marathon in Hawaii that started at sea level and ran all the way to the top of Haleakala, over 10,000 feet. I think over 35 miles, if I recall. And I was thinking at the time, yeah, I'm super fat adapted. I'm eating 300 grams of fat a day. Like, I could run that, I could win that, and I could prove that fat is the ultimate fuel, right? But that myth has been thoroughly debunked, and David Roche just completely blew all that out of the water, inspired in part by Tour de France athletes. But we'll get to his nutrition later. But his training specifically, what was so interesting is that he said, respect the hell out of the distance, right? So don't worry about the distance, 100 miles. You don't need to train for that. You don't need to be out there running, 30, 40 miles in preparation, building up your endurance to be able to do a 100-mile race. No, he didn't do that at all. He trained for speed, and he's training for another big event, the Western States right now. You can actually see a lot of his training. It's being professionally filmed and edited and put out into the world. And it's a great series. But in his last training session, he was filming himself running 4 minute and 28-second miles on a treadmill. Why would you why would you run way faster than marathon pace for like the world's greatest marathon runner? Why would you run way faster than that pace to do a 100-miler with a ton of vertical gain? I mean, it just absolutely makes no intuitive sense whatsoever. But he trained for speed, and he knew that if he was going to win this race, and if he was going to beat somebody, a record from a Matt Carpenter with a VO2 max of, 94.9 or whatever it was, who he, in all respects, viewed as a superior athlete to himself, the only way he could do it would be to basically run at a higher heart rate and thus be able to run faster. And David's goal was to be the fastest 5K runner to ever lace him up and try to compete at the Leadville 100. And so this guy's running near, Olympian 5K pace, and decided to solve the distance equation with nutrition. So he trained for speed. He did a lot of cycling. He lifts weights, all kinds of things that you just wouldn't expect, and that the ultra trail running world, that hasn't really been par for the course. Yeah, they do some intervals and stuff like that. I've read Jason Koop's book, which is kind of the Bible on the science that is known about ultra marathon running. And he broke a lot of the sacred cows that exist in that world. So the nutrition, he trained like a competitive eater. He actually followed a lot of their tactics in terms of ingesting huge amounts of fluid all at one time. And then he would go run with his belly sloshing around, right? Because one of the biggest challenges in ultra running is how do you eat enough to fuel yourself for 100 miles without barfing and shitting all over the place from upsetting your stomach, from consuming a ton of calories and fluids, while you're in the middle of bouncing up and down a bumpy trail, right? And so it's a really difficult equation to solve, but he really trained his eating to where not only was he able to consume a lot without upsetting his stomach, but he pushed the boundaries even higher than what people thought was possible. So going back to Jason Koop's book about ultra running, in his book, he was saying, 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour is considered about the max that a human can tolerate without upsetting your stomach, right? David Roche pushed that up to more like 140 grams per hour. And so what this does, right, if you're out running at a high heart rate, you burn glycogen. You're using carbohydrate as fuel, and you have a very limited amount of carbohydrate. And you can try to replace it with 90 grams per hour of carbohydrates. Everybody knows that's not enough to replace it. You've got to slow down. You've got to slow down, oxidize more fat for fuel, and that's what enables you to continue to make it, throughout the entire race without bonking. Bonking being when you run out of carbohydrate stores in your muscle, glycogen, and liver, right? When that happens, you're done. It's over. And so he was just trying to actually replace his carbohydrates enough to where he could push up his heart rate and burn more carbohydrate for energy, which allows you to go faster. And so he largely solved this riddle with carbohydrates. Now, it wasn't just during race time that allowed him to accomplish this, right? And this gets into the practicality that I think your typical person, your average person who's never going to do something crazy like this with their body can learn from, right? And so consuming these super high amounts of carbohydrates, it's great during the race, and it allowed him to run faster and break the record in his very first attempt, never having run anywhere near 100 miles. But what's interesting is that he fueled with a lot of carbohydrate during training, right? It's not so much that carbohydrate is so magical at fueling the race. It does. It helps. It's definitely a positive. Everybody who's in any kind of competitive, ultra endurance sports, triathlons, Tour de France, stuff like that, they're just absolutely crushing carbs. You can't compete at a high level without them, without doing that. But it's the ability to push yourself harder during your training and recover faster and adapt better and more quickly, and then stacking day after day after day, week after week, month after month, and even year after year. David Roche talks about, stacking bricks. He's out there stacking bricks. He's using this super, super high carb fueling to, go through training. If you push yourself a little bit harder, maybe 2% harder, or you go a few percent longer and you recover a few percentage points faster because of the high carb fueling, and then you multiply that times the number of training sessions leading up to an event, that's where real magic can happen. And that's the magic that David made. And so what's interesting about it all is that if your workouts are better and you're recovering from them faster and you can do more workouts, go harder in your workouts, then who really shouldn't be pounding carbs during their exercise, right? And so I think everybody can benefit from this. If you want to have better workouts that make a bigger impact on your fitness and you want to recover faster so that you can train more often, you need to be eating carbs before your workout. You need to be aiming for at least, 100 plus grams of carbs per hour, or let's say 2 grams per minute while exercising. And you need to have plenty of carbohydrates after to be able to recover again and again. And so super interesting stuff. Even the top athletes from Tour de France and stuff like that were thinking 120 grams per hour was like the max. So it's really this like competitive eater training that he did to train his stomach to handle all this without, vomiting. And, as soon as you vomit on a race like that, you're pretty much done. So anyway, that's the magic that he did. There was other secrets, He took quite a bit of baking soda before his event. He did a lot of heat training, right? Staying cool and heat adapted is really important, but the heat adaptation also increases your blood supply. And so it's almost like doping with EPO to do this like super heat training. Also, having adequate iron stores and stuff like that is really important. He ate a lot of red meat in the final week before his race to just like pump up the iron content of his blood to, again, increase his blood volume, which helps you push harder and stay cooler while you're competing. And he took post-workout ketones, right? That's kind of a new trend that's becoming more and more popular. I don't know why it works. I don't really know the science behind it, but it's another one of the things that he credits as being key. And but I mean, this guy is training super, super fast intervals. Like I said, he's running 4.5 minute miles, actually faster than that in training. He's lifting weights. He's doing sprints or strides, they call them, where you're just like basically out there almost running at full speed. He just wanted to be fast, train to get faster and let the fueling, let the carbohydrates, be in charge of your endurance. So anyway, super fascinating stuff. It's a huge accomplishment. He went and ran another one, the Javelina 100 down in, not Tucson, but Scottsdale. And he won that. And it was a really, really hot day, like 100-degree temperatures. And that was really the only thing that kept him from breaking the course record there. And he was very, very close. And that gave him an automatic ticket to compete in Western States, the Western States 100, which is one of the most difficult races in the world to qualify for. And he's going to be running that next year. I think that's in June, maybe, or not next year, this year, June 2025. And I've got a feeling he's gonna break the record there and do something really special and prove that this wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a fluke. I think he's already proven it wasn't a one-off or a fluke. But it's an amazing accomplishment, and him and his wife, who are super brainiacs and really into the science, really use science, cutting edge science, to do the impossible, to take the sport to a new height. And what's cool about, ultra running and running these 100-mile events is it's not just, oh, I won a sport or I got my little trophy. You're kind of, it's kind of a breakthrough for all mankind. Like, ooh, a human can do that. It previously was thought that a human couldn't do that, and go that fast. Now we know they can, because David Roche just showed the human race that, hey, we humans are actually capable of doing more than we thought we were. And I think that's what makes the sport so fascinating to me. Other than, of course, the fact that that Leadville 100 in particular is right over the hill from where I used to be a wilderness ranger, where I graduated from high school, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that, but a huge accomplishment, and I look forward to watching David. And go check out his series that he's got airing right now. He comes out with a new episode every week or two, it seems. And yeah, he doesn't, he shares everything 100%. He's completely transparent and candid. And he's a coach. His primary living is as a coach. It was cool that he was able to prove that how great his methodology is by going out and winning a race and breaking a record on his own, 2 races. So anyway, good stuff. Go check out David Roche, and I'm excited to see what happens next, and how all of ultra endurance sports continue to evolve after this sort of earth-shattering performance that David put together.